This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special return guest of the show, and it is Mike Glover. And so, to be honest with you, right here from the beginning, I think that this is one of the most important interviews that we've done. You should know at this point that I don't really use hyperbolic language just for the sake of it. Even as it was going on, I was like, this will likely have a very big impact that will go well beyond today, the day you're listening to it. And I think that there's going to be some rocks put in your shoe, some things that are going to bother you, some things that are really going to help you as you move forward. So if you're not aware of who Mike Glover is, he's a retired Green Beret and CIA contractor. He was deployed 15 times. He's also the founder and CEO of Fieldcraft Survival. So they do a lot of survival and disaster preparedness training courses. They do equipment with that training and all of that. And then he authored the book, Prepared, a Manual for Surviving Worst Case Scenarios. And I went on his show back in December of last year, and it really changed the trajectory of Undaunted Life because of how widely that was received and how well that was received. A lot of the clips went viral from that. I still think it's the most watched interview that he's ever done on his podcast, which is just showed, when we talk about biblical masculinity and the things therein, that there is still a thirst for that. But the thing about Mike Glover is if you've heard that name or seen that name over the last couple of months, it was attached to some pretty dire circumstances. So I remember getting a text from, one of the brown belts that I trained with, a SWAT guy named Dylan, and he's like, look, dude, Glover just got arrested for domestic. And I was just like, wait, what? Because, if you know anyone in the LEO community or any of those types of guys, domestic is one of the most common calls that they get. But it was like, wait, Glover got arrested? Yeah, he got arrested for like beating up his wife and breaking her wrists. And I was like, whoa. And as I even said in the interview, I was like, my first thought was like, man, you can't put your faith in people, like, because they'll always let you down. But then the very next thing I thought was like, well, this doesn't really make sense. Not that long ago, I was around both of them. And again, guys, just because you're around people, they might just be giving you, their best look. And then behind closed doors, we're all a little bit different. And some of us a lot different, right? But I just remember, wait, this doesn't really make sense. I started looking into the case. A lot of the details didn't quite make sense in terms of, the guy that I knew or the gal that I knew. And I talked with Greg Lappin, that's his black belt at his academy, a guy that I spent a lot of time with when I was out there in Utah. And I was like, hey, man, give me the lowdown on this. And essentially without violating trust or confidentiality, he's like, what you're seeing is complete BS. The details that are being released and even the charges that were brought against him are complete BS, because he went from one day just being a guy running a company and having this big profile to the very next day facing multiple decades, 30 plus years in prison involving multiple felony counts. And as we've worked through these last few months, he has, he had his phone taken away, put in as part of evidence, but he had kind of a separate phone that only a few people had the number. And so he and I would talk via the phone, and we would talk via, through his assistant and different things like that. And guys, it was really dire there for a little bit. It got very, very precarious. We get into that in the interview a little bit. Some of the treatment that he experienced in jail, and also the treatment that he almost experienced in jail was rather significant, and super negative in a lot of ways. A lot of these charges and a lot of like the lawfare that was happening behind the scenes that involved the city of Provo and the police department of Provo and different things. Like, there were a lot of things there that were like, oh my gosh, they're trying to string this guy up. It was like they were looking for an opportunity to get him, and then they found their gap and they ran with it. But the thing about this interview is, of course, we can't get into the exact details about the case. All the criminal charges have been dropped as of Tuesday of this week, if you're listening to this on time. And so that's one tremendous hurdle that is now behind him. But now he's got the hurdle of, getting access back to his wife and to his 9-month-old child and all these different things that are still being adjudicated and being figured out. But there's been something that has been shook loose in Mike, for lack of a better term. I could sense it the first time I talked to him on the phone, whenever all this, after all this was going down, because part of the reason why his and I's conversation on his show did so well is because we talked openly, and he talked openly about his faith and his upbringing and, kind of the things that he's wanting to do. But that focus has become the material and dominant focus of his life and for his future. And just to go from the extreme circumstances that he was experiencing to what he's talking about and the direction that he's talking about going now is incredibly significant. So those of you that are followers of Mike and have been concerned over the last couple of months, or even guys have maybe written him off, you really want to listen to this interview today as we talk about the stuff that we're going through, but also his perspective now on his role as head of his household, as a follower of Christ, and then additionally as a business owner and former operator and all these different things. It is tremendously focused on what the Father wants for him and wants to teach him and wants to work through him to teach others. And so, again, I said, I think this is a very, very important interview. If I sound somber in my tone, it's not really somber. It's more of a reverence for what's gone on and what we've been able to work through over these last couple of months, specifically with Mike, but then what things look like for the future. Even though it was very, very dark there for a little bit, there is a whole lot of light that's going to show up on the back end of this. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Mike Glover, I'm glad to have you back on the show. It's good to see you because you've been a little bit out of the limelight here for a little bit. We'll certainly get to that. But you sound like you're in a dream right now. Like I can hear rushing water. I can hear birds chirping right now. So where are you and why am I not there with you?
Well, I'm actually, thank God I'm at home. Unfortunately, I won't be here for long. I actually will be leaving this morning because of court mandates. I'll be leaving today. And to be honest, Kyle, I don't even know if I'll ever be coming back to this home. I honestly don't know. But it's tucked up against the mountains in Provo, Utah. I'm happy to be kind of in a better situation than I was talking to you before. But yeah, it's been a rough go, man. It's been 7 days.
Well, obviously we're going to get into a lot of that. You and I have talked a lot, but just right out off the top here, I got to say, over your left shoulder, I was pretty certain that was a black bear, but no, that's your dog. And so it's good to know that you're not going to get snuck up on. Yeah, look at that. Look at that beast out there. But obviously, I remember a very good friend of mine that I trained jiu-jitsu with. He sent me a text, a couple months ago and just said, "Hey, Glover's been arrested." And I'm like, arrested? Like for what? And I immediately went to like, hey, there's got to be some misunderstanding. And then I looked at the reason why you were arrested, and all I could think about was the advice I give to guys on my show all the time, which is, hey, don't put your faith in people because they'll let you down. Don't put your faith in your favorite pastor or politician or podcaster or internet personality or whatever, because they're going to let you down. That was my immediate thought. But then immediately my very next thought was, wait, none of this makes any sense. And so I reached out to a mutual friend of ours, and we've stayed connected. But I guess take me wherever you want to go with this, because there's been a lot of people that have been very, very worried about you, your family, and then tangentially your business and the impact that you've had through your books and your courses and everything else, fieldcraft, survival related. So let's just start there and then we'll work our way through.
Yeah. So, this all happened on May 1st, in the morning. And, a lot of things transpired in a very short period of time. To say I was blindsided would be a subtlety. I mean, I was rocketed into outer space, into a foreign world very quickly. After that morning, by noon, I was in jail, and part of general population. And I was attempted, based on a request, to be moved to solitary confinement. Again, for many reasons I had no clue of. When you are involved in some kind of domestic, some kind of potentially criminal action, the idea is you're innocent until proven guilty. I didn't feel that way. But I will say, being in jail for 7 days was life altering in many ways. One, I wasn't privy to anything that was going on the outside world. I know I had a lot of people subsequently after the fact. I found out I had a lot of people, including yourself, who were supporting me, who were praying for me. And to be honest, the fact that I'm sitting here talking to you now, and you've given me spiritual guidance along the way. The fact that I got out of jail in the first place is a miracle of God, because by design, that's not how it's supposed to work. I was booked on 31 years of charges, which included 4 serious felonies and 2 misdemeanors. And by design, according to the criminal justice system, based on the severity of my proposed crime, I was the worst of the worst and wasn't supposed to be let out. It was a no bail. And based on God, first and foremost, a lot of praying in a 15 by 8 center block cell, where I was allowed 90 minutes a day to get out of that cell, I was able to come to my defense in some form or fashion. And I was released after a week, after 7 days. So here I am 57 days later, and on day 56, all of my criminal charges have been dismissed, not based on opinions and philosophy and hopes and dreams, but prayers and evidence. And look, as traumatic as it is for me, because like I've always said, like as a military guy, I'm not a traumatic victim of circumstance. I was a volunteer, and I did so willingly. But I will tell you, this is the most traumatic circumstance of my life and that of my family's life. It also has affected and impacted everybody who's close to me, including close friends, but also my business, including my employees at Fieldcraft Survival. I mean, I took a 50% hit on revenue out the gate because of a leaked affidavit with unredacted information, which included the names, birth dates, and address of my children and my spouse.
Right.
And so, summing it up, I'm still going through legal processes and litigation despite the dismissal of the criminal component. And the fight's not over for me. I do want to say I thank friends and family, including people like you, who believe me and my family, because this wasn't just me; it was my family as well, including my spouse, who willingly recanted her statement on day 2, and nobody believed her. She fought for me. We fought for each other, despite now day 57 not being able to communicate to her or my now 9-month-old child that I haven't seen, except for about 16 hours total of visitation that the state has graciously allowed me. And I say that sarcastically.
Yeah.
But I'm just thankful to God and thankful to people who have been in our corner. And I'm a fighter. I'm going to defend myself, my family, and nothing's changed in that.
Well, Mike, I've got a lot of follow-ups, but I want to be clear about something from the beginning. And I don't want to go to the conspiracy stuff. You and I have talked offline about that, but the initial kinetic nature of your situation could have gone so poorly because they basically put an APB out on you and said, "Hey, this guy's armed, incredibly dangerous." I mean, because I've thought through the scenario, Mike, of like, what if SWAT had the wrong house and they kicked my door down someday, and I go to defend myself with the tools necessary to do so, like, and I hurt somebody or I'm killed or something. Like, you think about a situation like that. This was very, very precarious for a while there. But I want to be very, very clear, and I know we can't get into the specifics of the case because it's still being adjudicated and things like that. But just to put a very, very fine point on this, there was not finagling done by your high-powered, highly paid attorneys that, put the screws into your wife or something like that to get her to recant your statement. To be clear, you're telling me and the rest of the world there was never a physical assault of your wife. There was never a domestic assault, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that never happened.
And Mike, the reason why I wanted to be so clear about that is because in this type of a situation with a person with a public profile, there's all kinds of finagling going on. Like I'm digging in right now to some stuff that happened with a very high profile pastor and the finagling that went on behind the scenes to basically hide his sins, which were egregious, which was basically pedophilia. And there's always something where there's an attorney involved or an NDA involved or a bunch of people with a bunch of money that just like, hey, let's make this situation go away. But I want to dig in a little bit more into the support that you got during this time, because, I'm reminded in 2 Timothy, Timothy, or Paul is writing a letter to his pupil, Timothy. And at this point, he's in a Roman prison and he knows he's not getting out. And that was perhaps a familiar feeling for you because you didn't know exactly what was going to happen. And somehow in that moment, even though his supporters had left him, people that had done ministry with him and supported him the whole way had basically turned their back on him almost immediately, he was still incredibly faithful and was able to write these incredibly powerful words to his pupil, Timothy. Tell me about your mindset, because your communication with the outside world was incredibly hampered because your phone was taken away. I was basically getting messages to you through a mutual friend and, your assistant and things like that. But just tell me about the support that you got during that time. And, I guess talk a little bit about the people that maybe just took what they saw on Twitter and ran with it and said, you know what, screw Mike Glover. He's toxic from here on out.
Yeah, it was interesting finding out about it in hindsight, and I'm very understanding of the fact of being a popular figure in social media. The way you want things to work out aren't necessarily the things, or the way that they're going to work out. And I didn't think my spouse nor my children would be propelled into the limelight, but I was truly offended by that, especially because there's a burden of responsibility on law enforcement to protect both the victim in this case, as well as minors in this case, which just happened to be my spouse and my children. And when I found out at a latter date, probably day 8, that their faces, their names, and my address was put all over social media, that was very worrisome for me and my family, because I felt so helpless. I mean, right? Like, you're a man, your job is to protect and defend your family. And despite the circumstances I was handed, I felt helpless. And I still feel even helpless today. Like, I'm not able to communicate. I haven't communicated to my spouse in 57 days. Yeah. And I asked God why, and I asked the legal team why, and I asked myself why. And at the same time, that I was kind of like falling apart, which was by the day, and I'm kind of just picking up the pieces now. I was also getting a lot of support and rallying from friends who showed up and were reaching out to me immediately. Like I said to you early, I didn't have my phone for a month because a warrant was served on it on like day 2 or 3 when the police officers pulled me out of jail and confiscated the phone. So I didn't realize the amount of communication that was taking place. But as soon as I got out, I was welcomed by family and brothers in arms that I served with, including gentlemen like Greg Lappin and Evan Hafer and Andy Stumpf and Jocko and all these amazing human beings. And, there's too many to name, that not only supported me, but talked me off the ledge, man. I mean, I cried in Evan Hafer's shoulder in an Airbnb 10 minutes from his house, dislocated from my family, and knowing at that moment my world was falling apart and had nobody to run to, and was desperate. And he talked me off the ledge. Greg Lappin, who sat behind me in court, and every time he said, if you feel like you're falling apart, turn around and just look at me, and I'll walk you through it by helping you breathe. And I did that constantly during that hearing because it involved my children. So, yeah, it was tough. And I'm thankful that I have really good friends in my corner. And I'm thankful that they were there for me, because I don't know if I'd be here without them, to be honest.
Well, Mike, go back to when you and I met at the end of last year when I came to Utah and we did an interview. And I mean, you knew me, you knew of me, but we didn't really know each other that well, and we became fast friends. But, the most viral clip from our little chat, which, frankly changed the trajectory of Undaunted.Life forever, was where I just kind of floated on what it means to be a 3 a.m. friend, right? And so I talk about it in the context of Foxhole Guy, but so many guys don't have those 3 a.m. dudes, those dudes that will sit behind them in court and say, "Hey, look at me. I'll help steady you. Like, if you start to fall apart, just let me know." Like, those types of people, the people that will hop on an airplane or take time out of their day to, record a video to give you the support that you need. But I do want to go back to something that you told me one of the first times that we connected after this, that while you were in jail, you missed out on solitary confinement by this much, right? So essentially what you told me is that because of the charges and because of the nature of who you are and how dangerous you are and all these things, they were going to be putting you in a literal hole where the only way that you could, get excrement out of your body was in a hole in the middle of the floor, no contact with other prisoners because you were going to apparently start a riot and a revolt or something like that. And it was the dutiful attention of an officer in a hallway that actually kept that from happening. So I know you can't name names and anything like that because that wouldn't be fair to the individual person, but talk to me a little bit about that, because in all of this, and there's a lot of scary stuff about this situation, a lot of which we can't talk about here on the air, but that was one thing where it's easy for just about all of us to put ourselves in those shoes. And what would have happened if God had not coordinated you walking by that man, at that exact moment. So talk to me a little bit more about that, because it was hard enough for you mentally to make it through that time. And I can only imagine what it would have been like if you were put in a dark, dank hole alone.
Yeah, I was, man, I was having some very serious, issues with the whole situation. And they put me in general population, which is like basically a holding area before they put you into the place that you're going to spend your time. So when they moved me into this room, there's like 8 other guys. And I thought to myself at some points in this that, oh, this isn't that bad. There's men here. I'm able to socialize and talk to these men. I had these guys doing yoga with me and breathing exercises and telling them about, how they need to be better fathers and focus their attention to God and trying to help them, because that helped me. And they came in and look, this is Utah County Corrections officers. They came in and said, "Hey, Glover, grab all your stuff, your bunk bed, your sleeping pad, and all your belongings," which were a whole bunch of folded pieces of paper and a small pen or a small pencil. But that's like your life. I said, "Get your stuff and then start moving down and follow me." And so I get into the hallway and I'm walking down the hallway, and this is only hours after being arrested and then processed to the system. And as I'm walking down the hallway, I see 2 corrections officers coming down the main hallway, and they intercept us. I could see their intent to intercept us. It wasn't just a happenstance. They deliberately came out when they heard the call. And they said, "Where are you moving?" It was a younger corrections officer. Where are you moving, Mike? And he said, "I just got a call and a request," which I found out later came from a police department, which we'll get into offline later on. It came from a police department, and they had a request to move him into solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is just that. It's a empty room, basically, with a hole. And it's typically for murderers and people who are suicidal. If you're suicidal, they take your clothes, they give you a poncho, and they just put you in this hole. And you stay in this hole until you kind of graduate, until they realize, like, hey, you're calm, you're going to be able to get through this, and then they move you on to a higher level or a lower level of security. So I'm confused because I don't know what's going on. I'm just going with the flow, and I look at them all, and I'm like, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And they're like, oh, it's a bad thing. And then one of the officers says to me that intercepted us, he says, "Are you having a mental health crisis?" I said, "No, not at all." He said, okay, so why are we moving them? And the corrections officer really didn't have a good reason besides it was requested. Now, according to both the security assessment, which is the community security assessment from the state of Utah, I was deemed no bail and the most dangerous, basically, member of society and should never be allowed out and be isolated by all means. And they use the word restriction. And so I'm kind of like taken back because I have no clue what's going on. And they tell me, look, you don't need to be in solitary confinement. He doesn't need to be in solitary confinement. Turn him around. And this guy was a supervisor. I could tell by his demeanor, his posture. He turned this officer around and he put me back in my cell. And, 2 days later, I was processed and then put into basically my cell with a cellmate, where I would get 90 minutes out per day. And then which was that next level, it's right above solitary. And then if you get from that, you go to like a couple hours a day, and then you get like 4 hours a day, and then 3 sessions of 4 hours a day, depending on how good you are. But I was basically the highest level restricted. And the only reason I wasn't put in a hole where I literally wouldn't be able to come out of a hole or cell, except if my lawyer pulled me out, was because of the grace of corrections officer who in the beginning knew something wasn't right based on how they were interacting with other agencies and the things that were being said, including the litany of charges, which, by the way, those same charges are like the equivalent to manslaughter. They're the same charges if you walked into a home and beat your entire family with baseball bats, entire family, like your spouse and your 3 kids with baseball bats, and then kidnapped them and then went to jail.
Okay, so as you're describing that, Mike, the thing that kept coming to mind, and again, I don't like engaging in hyperbole or conspiracy theories or something like that, but it seemed like to me they were trying to get you to react to something. So in the APB that was put out initially, the force that they showed trying to find you, the things that they were doing inside of the jail, potentially putting you in the hole, it seemed like there was a coordinated effort to get Mike to react, to get you to do something to yourself, to hurt someone else, to maybe have a little freak out session so that they could have something to point to be like, you see. And again, it's been widely publicized for anyone that knows you and knows your company that the federal government has targeted you and at least put you on a list as like, oh, this is someone that could be a potential domestic terror threat and all that. We should probably keep an eye on this guy and the people that he's training. And, there's a lot of smoke there, if not a full on raging fire. And so if you can talk a little bit more about that, that's just something that as you were talking, that just seemed evident to me that was going on.
Yeah, it's definitely not a conspiracy because I have direct evidence supporting that theory. And without going into much detail, what I will say is, look, the institutions that are meant to defend, protect, secure, treat, take care of us as a whole are inherently flawed now. I was on the news this morning, and it just occurred to me because I was looking at the headlines of how many of the headlines include some type of litigation or some type of correlation to law, legal systems, courts. And it was like 90%. It was 9 out of 10 articles had something to do with some form of litigation. The Trump component, courts and systems. And what you're seeing is a broken society in many ways across the spectrum, right? We know this. We talk about it. Me and you have talked about it a lot. I think it's because of many things, including the lack of Christ and God in our lives. But when you look at these institutions that are ran by members of society which are inherently flawed and broken, like us all, there's an opportunity to utilize the power in those systems to weaponize against people who are just foes. I don't know. I don't know the prejudice. I don't know the component or characteristics of prejudice. I could speculate, but I could tell you right now, I have a litany of evidence to prove that, including text message. I have the receipts, and eventually that will come out. But to be on the other side of that, to have a company down in Provo, to have my house here in Provo, supporting the community, teaching law enforcement, doing everything I can to make sure that my community is policed up and taken care of, and then have those same institutions we support turning around and declaring me a hazard and threat to my own community. It's Rambo. I mean, it's like the story of Rambo. Like Rambo comes back from Vietnam, and it's like it's a made for movie or made for TV a movie. It's like all the things that you would see in drama. But what was the storyline? He comes back from Vietnam. He just wants to be left the hell alone, and then he has tyrannical, radical people who decide to pick on him, and he burns the entire town down. Now, I have been a professional my entire career. Like this idea that somehow I just woke up one day and decided to terrorize my family and the world is false. What I will say is people forget in these institutions where I come from. I don't do anything haphazardly. I don't react. I respond. And I do so with a very comprehensive contingency-based plan. And I don't do anything on accident. So when you're picking on a guy who spent 26 years of his life in a professional career field of doing just that, and just thinking that, oh, this is what tipped him off, he must have whatever it is, that's a false reality. That shows complacency on their end, and the facts will come to light at some time. Here's what I'll say. Lastly, I love my family. My spouse is a good woman, a Christian woman, a faithful woman. And just as I'm the victim, she's the victim, and so is my entire family. So are my friends who've been targeted by this. I can't even tell you the level of targeting, and that will come out as well. But even friends close to me who have supported me have been targeted, and that's wrong. My spouse has been targeted by social media. She's been demonized by radical influencers, and she's been demonized by components of the institutions that look at her like she's evil, as they've looked at me like I'm evil. And all of that will come to light, and I will defend my family. I'm not defending myself. I'll defend my family, and in any matter of time. I'm impatient by nature, but I am very impatient for the facts of this case and all the things that and all the receipts that you have to come to light. I would encourage the audience to be patient, but also to keep paying attention to what's happening here, because if it can happen to you, it can happen to everyone else listening to this and to me. And, we've all kind of battened down the hatchets a little bit to get ready for the blowback. And I know there will be blowback for this interview, and there will be people that will be added to lists, and there will be people that will be added to target packages and things like that. I don't mean that like, I'm not assuming a drone's going to come to Edmond, Oklahoma and give me a visit or anything like that, but who the heck knows? But also I think there's a component here that sometimes we just have to wait for the dust to settle. Everybody is so ready to cancel a person or to get rid of a person or to believe the headline as opposed to what's actually happening in the situation. So I think it's always best to do that. But I do want to go back to when you're in jail. This is one of the things that we talked about offline. But there was a certain point where there was a level of despair that most of us can't really know unless we ourselves have experienced it, to where all at once you think, I've lost my marriage, I've lost my children, I've lost my business, I've lost my reputation, which takes a lifetime to put together, and the reputation of an operator that has tremendous amounts of self-control. Like, you've never been in a bar fight. You've never been in a situation where you used your training, from SF to like hurt somebody else because you had an axe to grind or something like that, or because you had an ego problem. But in all of this, you felt like you were losing everything up to and including your own life. And at that moment, you had some choices. You could have lashed out, or you could have cried out, and you decided to cry out, and you cried out to God, which again, for a lot of people, that's not really something that you talk about
too terribly often. That's why, the talk that you and I did on your show, it was so widely received because they're like, oh, this is a conversation with a guy like this that we don't normally get to hear. So take me through a little bit of that, to where you're basically busted up and things aren't looking good and you're in jail and you decided, all right, God, you're in this situation. It's time to show up.
Yeah. I've been talking to God since I can remember talking. I mean, I grew up a faithful Baptist in the South. All my family's from Georgia. They're all raised Baptist. I was raised Baptist. I was saved when I was 10 years old. I was baptized when I was 10. Like, it's all I remember, but I've subsequently, via our first conversation, suppressed a lot of that, keeping it to myself, maintaining some privatized, word of God down deep in me, because I didn't want to influence or negatively impact people, because I had a worldly perspective, I thought, because I spent time with Muslims and I spent time overseas where, potentially talking about God and in specific ways would destroy rapport, right? When I should have been doing the opposite. I should have been professing my faith and potentially changing those people's lives. I had many opportunities that I failed at as a Christian. And, obviously it's easy to find God at the bottom of a barrel. When you're at the very lowest point in your life, which certainly I was in that jail cell, staring at the cracks in the center blocks, looking at my hands, realizing I may never have my children's hands inside of my hands for years to come. That was a tough pill to swallow, but it was easy to reinvigorate my faith in God, and it's what got me through. When I had periods of complete loss of control, all I would do was read King James Bible out loud to myself, pacing myself until I couldn't walk anymore. I would do push-ups and jumping jacks until my body would literally lock up. And then I would hold the Bible and lay in my bunk until I passed out. I mean, I got no sleep. It was the most difficult situation I've ever been in. And those 7 days, those 6 nights in jail, I would rather go through 7 iterations of survival school in a hole, in a box, getting slapped by instructors. I would rather be a prisoner of war than be in a situation where I'm dislocated and disaffected from my family. As you said about like social media, like all these people who naysay, I am way beyond that. When you are stripped down to naked, where you have nothing left, you restructure your hierarchy of needs. And the last thing I care about in jail, and I care about now, is my position on the hierarchy scale of influencers on Instagram. I give a crap about any of that. What I've realized is I've put more energy in my position than I have my family. I talk about like, oh yeah, these are the things that happened. This is the things that I did and didn't do, but I am inherently flawed. Where I've made the most mistakes is not investing enough. Where I would give my podcast guest hours of my time, I wouldn't give my spouse 10 minutes of my time to emotionally communicate and navigate the difficulties in our relationship, to lead through God. Yeah, I said it in my head. I said it potentially out loud, but I didn't do it on a day-to-day basis. And that's where you discover all of those flaws at the very bottom. And if there's any good that comes out of any of this, it's rediscovering, potentially with never getting my family back, by the way. I don't know how this unfolds. I don't know if I'll ever be with my spouse again. I don't know if I'll ever not be on a schedule to see my infant son. But what I do know is every day that I wake up, I will lead with prayer, scripture, and my faith in God, and lead everybody around me in the same way. And I will never keep quiet about the feeling that I have in my heart and my soul that I've always had to profess my love for Jesus Christ and God. I will never do that again.
Hey guys, real quick. If you're anything like me, you are constantly on the lookout for high quality products that are actually made here in America by American hands. The problem is that a lot of American companies have outsourced their labor overseas, so it's an American company, but it's supporting people that don't live here. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that prioritizes America, American workers, and making all of their materials here in this country. That's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Origin. Origin is an apparel company based in Maine, and they are focused on getting as much manufacturing back to the United States as they can possibly do. What do they make? They make the best jiu-jitsu gis on the planet, and these are the only jiu-jitsu gis that are made completely in America. They also make jeans. Yes, they're stretchy and awesome. They also make amazing hunting gear, and I know you guys love your Kuiu and your Sitka, but those companies use overseas labor, and they don't do that to help you guys out. They do that to increase their profit margins. Origin also makes boots and work boots, and yes, that does include steel-toe boots. And in the fall of last year, they launched a line of everyday clothing. Their Versa pants are their everyday pants, and they are just especially phenomenal. They also make other outdoor clothes and workout clothes, and they're launching new apparel stuff all the time. If you haven't already, you need to check them out and support a company that supports America and America's workers. Try Origin out today by going to www.originusa.com. That's originusa.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's originusa.com. Promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. So let's actually dig in a little bit more there, because you and I, our brains work a lot in the same way, where we will look back on past experiences and just be like, I tell people all the time, you should look back on who you were 5 years ago and always be a little bit embarrassed. Like, wait, I thought that. I used to, say things like that. I used to like that band or whatever the situation is. But we will look back on those moments where we should have said something, and we will just play that over and over in our brains. And it's interesting, Mike, that you have a situation like this where you are brought low, right? Where you are stripped down, as you've talked about, literally, and figuratively. And it took that to get you to this point where you have an overwhelmingly clear picture of what it is the next era of your life is going to look like as it pertains to your relationship with Jesus Christ and your professing of the gospel. So take me to that, because people will have these big experiences, or maybe it's like the church camp phenomenon where you get back from church camp and, oh boy, you're fired up and I'm going to read my Bible every day. And gosh darn it, I'm only going to listen to Christian music, and I'm never going to say a bad word ever again. And I'm just going to do all that. And then the dust settles after a few weeks, and then they kind of go back. But this is different for you because it has been a reshuffling of your life and your priorities that you did not start. You did not initiate. But you have made changes already in terms of what, Mike Glover is going to be doing business-wise, but also ministry-wise as you continue and as you work your way through this situation. So just talk to me a little bit more about that, because I'm sure there are a lot of people that are excited about this and want to get you going and to really help you. Tell us how we can encourage you in this, and kind of what your plans are in terms of what that looks like tangibly.
Yeah, I think one, the sergeant major in me wants to lead by example by professing the errors, the mistakes, so that men and people don't make the same mistakes that I made, where I talk about it in preparedness, where everything leads up to this tipping point. And then catastrophically, by the time you figure it out, it's too late. But that's okay. That is sometimes the cycle of life. And also, I think, God's plan is perfect for everyone. It could be the cycle of your faith and you're slipping away from faith. I have seen many times in my life where I've gotten to tipping points and I've made gross errors. And the common denominator is me being further distanced from God and my faith in Jesus Christ. That has always been the common denominator. I read a verse, and I'm hacking it. You might know it exactly. It's like James chapter 1, verse 19 through 20, about being quick to listen or quick to hear and slow to anger, because God detests this component in you that is angry. And when I think through these circumstances of my life, I have always prioritized things in what I thought was my own principles and value metric. But that got further away from my position with God. And so if it all starts with that, then everything falls into place. So what I did basically is I woke up and I prioritized, I'm going to be a protector, a defender, and a provider. And most men wrap their arms around that. But
Right.
a lot of men use it as an excuse. Because
Right.
when
It's
I'm a provider, I can
it's a virtuous thing, Mike. It's very, very virtuous, but it's not the right aim.
Yeah, it's because if I'm providing, I'm hunting in the back country. And honey, I got to put meat in the freezer because it's who I am as a man. And not to say that that's a bad thing, but it's like every time you allocate your energy in something, you are neglecting something else.
Right.
What I've realized is whenever you invest in God, you are actually benefiting everything else. It is like, I do the mason jar analogy where I'm like, you're investing all your coins in one, your eggs in one basket. And then you look at the other jar and you're like, well, that's completely empty. Like my spouse's emotional capacity to live with me, it's zero. But me going hunting, me going fishing, me going to work and providing for my family, oh, it's full.
Right.
But what are you giving back? If you're investing everything in God at the top of it, it's spilling over into everything else.
Correct.
Because through your faith, you're investing in everything across the whole that's important to you. So I did all of the things wrong, and this process for me reshuffled the deck. And what I realized when I wake up with God in mind, when I wake up with prayer in mind, when I focus my attention on not drowning in sin, man, everything just seemingly falls into place. And it's always been like that. You're going to fall from grace. You're going to slip away. You're going to get out of church. You're going to do all these different things. But guess what? You're either going to make a catastrophic mistake because it's the plan of God, or you'll be intelligent enough to listen to examples like mine, like yours, like others, and go, you know what? I don't have to fall from grace. I could actually realize that Mike fell, and I just need to realign some things and figure things out, which is part of the process. Man, I don't even know if I'll ever do Fieldcraft Survival again personally. I don't know if I'll do that. I don't know if I'll be on a range teaching carbine, because I have a lot of stuff to work on that doesn't include teaching people how to shoot a pistol. And I know, like, people love the personal defense and the gun stuff and all this stuff. But you know what? What's more important is my family. What's more important is my health and wellness. And what's more important is my relationship with God.
Well, Mike, this would be my encouragement to you. And you and I have been working through this and will continue to work through this. But my encouragement would be to you is the skills that you gain by being in the United States military, by being deployed, by doing some of the other contracting stuff that you've done. Those are skills that you can utilize for the sake of the gospel. And so whenever I talk to certain guys, there are certain guys that don't want anything to do with me until they see my ear. And then they're like, oh, your ears are messed up. Like, did you wrestle? Do you do jujitsu? And then all of a sudden that opens up the conversation, because before that I was just some Christian, some Bible thumper guy that, talks about conservative politics. Right. But you're going to be able to talk to people in a way that maybe a lifelong pastor or minister is not. And perhaps it shouldn't be that way, but it's just the way that it is. There are guys that will judge you based on, whether or not you've got a pocket knife on your pocket, or whether or not you're wearing the right kind of hat, or you're carrying the right type of pistol or something like that. So I think that you are uniquely suited to speak to men in a way that perhaps a lot of other men wouldn't. And so, but let's talk a little bit more about that, because when you were in prison, you're obviously there with a lot of guys that are destitute, have made a lot of wrong turns, have made a lot of wrong decisions, and they've put themselves into these bad spots and have ended up in bad places. But because of the things that you experienced in prison, because of the things that were revealed to you during this time by God, through the Holy Spirit, because of the things that you are capable of doing moving forward, what is your focus on how you specifically, because we've talked about doing this together, but even just you, Mike, specifically, how you can help these men understand, yes, be a protector. Yes, be a provider. But if you are not shepherding your family, if you do not have headship of your household, if you are not protecting your wife and your children spiritually, then you're missing the mark, brother. Like, what do you want to do, and how do you want to make that happen as it goes in the future? I know we're both kind of looking through the glass dimly right now, but at the same time, I think there's a pretty good idea of the direction that you should go.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a difficult landscape that I've conveyed to you and your pastor about how do I navigate this landscape of a saturation of opinions and paths and journeys, and how do I make sense of it all, right? And I think if you're somebody like me who is looking for a path based foundationally in God, there's many things that you could do, right? One, like you said, you can't foundationally lead your family unless you have that. We talk about resilience and preparedness. It's like resilience is your faith. It's not even the foundation. It's the earth. You can't even lay a foundation if you don't have the earth beneath the foundation. So all these things you want to build are based on your faith. And what's more virtuous than leading your family through your faith and shared love of God? What's more virtuous than that? There is none. So we like to say, like, especially in preparedness, like, I'm going to be the virtuous defender and protector. Well, that's nice, but what happens if you haven't accepted Jesus Christ, if you haven't led your family, then you all burn in hell. I mean, I hate to say that out loud, but that's how it works.
Yeah.
So you're willing to protect and defend in a circumstance that's so narrow in scope and field, but you're not really willing to address the 10 million pound gorilla in the room, which is eternal life, right? So when I look at all of the things that you could do and all of the ways that you could do it, there are good resources, including yourself. I mean, you're like a spiritual unicorn for me, right? You're a guide for me to, like, make me understand how this world works. Like I said to you, I want to start a church. My mom and my family, all of her Korean sisters, my grandma who's 90, since I was a child, have always wanted me to be a pastor. And I came to you and said, hey, how do I do this? I don't even know the start point in this. Do I just, because I want a cowboy church, because I like to wear ball caps and cowboy hats and boots. I don't like the formalities of certain things. And so how do I do that? And you're like, well, you need to get in, you need to get educated. It starts with education. It starts getting involved with the church. It starts with community, and it's multifaceted. But the interesting thing is, when you start looking at it all, it requires a plan, and that plan brings purpose. And it inspires me. It actually reinvigorates me to go, wow, there's another path, another journey that I haven't even touched. I haven't even taken one step into this. And, I talked to you about, and your pastor, Joby, about a Masters of Divinity program, right? I have my GI Bill.
Yep.
I've started the registration process with a Masters of Divinity, with a focus in biblical studies, because I know my error. My error is in not understanding the scripture, right? And I want to become more educated and knowledgeable, because I can talk to people, but if I don't reference the word of God, then I'm only haphazarding myself through those murky waters. Right. I want to be able to make the connection for people. And I'm not doing it for social media. I'm not doing it for YouTube. I don't want to be the dude with a mic who's talking to millions of people, who's caught up in the Dateline controversy. I want to be talking to my local community, and most significantly, my family. I'm doing it for me being able to communicate to my children and my spouse in my living room. That's the start point for me. It's like, I know people think, oh, this is a big business plan. There's no business involved. I don't care about the business aspects of my faith and developing a marketing scheme. I care about developing and inspiring and marketing to my children, to my spouse, to my family, and hopefully one day, if God allows it, my community.
So, Mike, it's interesting that you talk about that, because you will have the cynics out there that are like, okay, this is just a ploy. Like earlier this year, I had to take a few weeks to deal with some stuff that was going on in my extended family. And, I needed to kind of go dark for a second so I could give full attention to what was going on. And some of the first comments on YouTube on my return video was like, oh, this was all just a ploy for more views. And, you see these people, like there was this gal that was doing OnlyFans, and she was making millions of dollars, and then she becomes a Christian. And the first comments which were coming from a lot of Christians, was like, oh, this is some sort of ploy for money. It's like, do you dorks not know anything about how marketing and money works? Like, she was going to be making way more money staying and doing the depraved things that she was doing than to all of a sudden be a Christian. Like, she's not going to get paid a whole bunch of money to go be a Christian speaker for the rest of her life. You know, we wish her well, but it's kind of the same thing. There seems to be a fervent focus. And the thing that I love about what you're saying, Mike, is some people will see guys like Pastor Joby or like any of these other big pastors that have big profiles and sell a lot of books and be like, that's what I want. I want the big stage. I want the microphone on my face, and I want the, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people hanging on my every word so that I can control them and send them in the direction that I want to send them. That's not what I'm hearing from you. And so that's the thing that's encouraging to me is you're starting small, which is your biggest task that you've been given on this planet, which is head of your household, starting there and letting it work out from your community. Now, kind of speaking of community, obviously you're in Provo, Utah now. That's the center of Mormon country. And that probably has a lot to do with some of the things that went on during this case, which we can't really get into. But where are you going to end up? Because I don't think Fieldcraft's over, not by a long shot. I don't think that your role with Fieldcraft is over, not by a long shot. I think that the gospel-centered things that you're thinking through right now will have an incredibly incendiary effect in a positive way to what you're doing via Fieldcraft, and will send it to a different and even better dimension. But it seems like your time in Provo is going to need to come to a close before long. And you alluded to that, at the very, very beginning of this interview, that this might be the last time you're at your house, might be the last time that you're in that area. But what does that look like for you if you're going to be focusing on community, family first, but then, the community outside of the walls of your home? Where does that take you?
Honestly, I don't know, man. I was up at 3 a.m. on my balcony, right outside my room, praying to God, looking up at the sky in my underwear, asking God for guidance and what the next steps are for me in my path and my journey. I have to learn to live again. I have realized getting this massive reset that I don't even know how to live. I don't know how to function without this distinct purpose of work, of drowning myself by distracting myself through my virtue of work, right? So when everything got quiet, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I stood. And so all of the things that I was tethered to, whether it was the social media, whether it was the preparedness guy, the tactical operator, all these things got stripped down. And I talk about this in preparedness engagements. It's like who you really are is that couple of minutes on your pillow right before you go to bed. That's who you really are, because you don't have the ability to virtue signal to the world. You have quiet moments, and then it's just you and God. Right. And it's like, if you don't know who you are in that moment, you're lost. Well, I've been lost, and I've been having to redefine myself and figure it out step by step. And to be honest, I don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. I honestly don't know where I'm going to be tomorrow. I know I'm going to be in an Airbnb distance from here, not able to communicate to my family, my spouse, my child. And I don't know where the next steps will be, because I'm dependent on reacting to the offensive nature of an institution that wants to bury me underneath the jail. Right. So look, I think, my family wants me to continue to inspire people and do all these things, but that's the last thing on my mind. If people listen to this, I'm happy. I'm satisfied. I tweeted for the first time yesterday, which sounds disgusting after 57 days and not being on social media, because I wanted to let people know that it was okay and thank people for their support. And that's it. I don't want to be drawn back into this world of toxicity, because the most appreciative and significant moments in my life with Fieldcraft and my journey have been face-to-face engagement, shaking hands and telling people that they're going to be okay. I care about them. That engagement is something that will likely be the future of my life and journey. Look, I lost it all. I'm likely going to, look, I don't know how Fieldcraft unwinds or bounces back from 50% hits in revenue. My book deal, gone. Like multi-million-dollar deal over years, completely gone. How do you bounce back from that? You just do the best you can. And so my focus, again, isn't any of this. My focus is breathing. It's not my social media account. It's not my bank account. It is breathing from moment to moment. Lastly, look, I pray. I mean, God has answered all my prayers. I prayed for guidance, and a voice came into my head, and I'm only going to I'm going to clearly and concisely tell you it was the voice of God. Not likely, it was the voice of God. And he said, refer back to the 10 Commandments for guidance. When I went back to the 10 Commandments, there's a very good social media YouTube kind of thing called the Bible Project. And they do like really good anecdotes of the Bible, but it's more modern, it's illustrative, it's visionary. And they talked about the 10 Commandments. And what I took from multiple sources of the 10 Commandments was multiple offenses from me of not just sinning, but drowning in sin. The most significant one was my attachment to materialism. So I was making more money so I could buy more crap to satisfy those around me. And then I realized, because all of those people around me were like, sell all the crap. I don't need that crap. I don't need the bicycle you bought for me for my birthday. And the reaction naturally would be, how could you? But why would you? Unless you were materialistically tethered to this idea that was going to bring you happiness. Because my spouse didn't want a mountain bike that cost $2,000. She wanted 10 minutes of my time, and I couldn't give it.
Yeah.
So taking a step back, I realized the way I was living my entire life was wrong. And so now what am I doing? I'm purging everything. I don't want to be a minimalist and a weirdo and don't have anything, living in a treehouse in Washington. I want to get rid and purge this idea and this concept that's going to make me happy. What has that done for me? Well, my priority isn't making more social media followers to get more money, to get more crap. It's how can I just police myself up? How can I take care of my family? And my priorities are not the same. I don't know what tomorrow. Hell, Kyle, I don't know what this afternoon brings me. I have a hearing today at 4:30. I don't know what today brings me. My mom's like, have you heard any news? No. What? Well, are they going to communicate? I don't know. I am at the mercy of God's perfect plan, and I'm letting Jesus take the wheel.
Well, Mike, here's the thing. I'm always reminded of this. So, Psalm 119, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. We want it to be a floodlight though, right? We want the entire pathway to be lit for us so that we can know exactly what all the steps are going to be. But the real goal, especially in the moment that you're in right now, Mike, is what is the next best step? What is the next right step for me to go in the direction that God has for me? Because even if you're going in the right direction, like if you have the right north that you're trying to go towards, if you veer off path, you can get back on the path pretty quickly. And here's the other thing that I would say to the guys listening to this and also to you. It's not how many years you've been a Christian, it's how many hours, right? Someone told me that a long time ago, and it's like that applies to a lot of things. It's not how many years you do jujitsu, it's how many hours. It's not how many years you've been shooting, it's how many hours you've been shooting. And so that is super applicable to where it's like, what in this exact moment is the next right step? So when you want to react in your flesh to something that's happening inside of your family, what is the exact right step with what you do there? Whenever you're wanting to chase that next thing, whether it's that next promotion or that next million or that next, 10,000 followers or whatever your thing is, it's like, what is the most God honoring thing for me to do in this moment? But Mike, even from the first time that you and I spoke to one another, you have a heart for men, and you have it in a very, even then you had it in a very healthy way, but now it's even more specific and even more healthy, as I would say. So what would be your message to the guys listening to this right now that are in their own valley of the shadow of death, which, as you and I talked about, and as the message I gave you, is the greatest thing about the valley of the shadow of death? The first is that God's allowing you to go through it, but second, it's that he's allowing you to go through it and not forsake you and not leave you there. The greatest thing about that valley is that God is there with you. There are dudes that are in the valley of shadow of death right now, Mike. What's your message to them?
Yeah, my message is it's never too late, and you always have a choice. And there's philosophical differences in the idea that God's perfect plan means you just sit idle and wait. I take the value from God's perfect plan that perfect plan could be facilitated by being guided by the light and making the right choices and understanding that it's never too late. If you're listening to this and you find yourself in a difficult circumstance where you're slipping further away from God, which is likely facilitating you slipping further away from everything in your life, you're headed to a crossroad in disaster. You're headed to a side impact that is going to knock you off the intersection and potentially take your life in various forms, in various ways. So if you want control, start with God, start with prayer, start with scripture, and get yourself right. It's never too late. I wish I was hearing my own advice 58 days ago. I had a choice to mitigate risk in my own household by being compassionate, empathetic, and a good communicator. All virtues of being a good Christian and a follower of Jesus Christ and God. So it's never too late. Make a choice, and I would opt in to make that choice right now. I wouldn't wait. Like when I started doing rewilding courses, where the concept was tribe community, it should have been tethered and based in faith. Men got up from the fire side chat and said, I'm changing my life right now. I mean, there's people who left our course who said, I haven't talked to my daughter in 17 years. I'm going home because I'm making that change. Be very willing to open yourself up to that level of personal courage and do it now, because it may be too late tomorrow.
That would be my encouragement as well, because guys, when you feel the prompting and the whisper of the Holy Spirit, which one thing to talk about that earlier when you were talking about hearing the voice of God, guys, we will hear voices. Those voices aren't always God. So you have to put them through the filter of something like, where is this message coming from? So if the message is, you're terrible, you're awful, everyone's finally figured you out, you're an imposter, like you should probably just end it. There's not a single way that a message like that comes from the Father, not whatsoever, because he wants amazing things for you. But for a lot of guys, Mike, like that's not subtle. That's not a subtle message. That might be easy to differentiate whether that's coming from the light or from the dark. But sometimes there are messages that you'll hear that voice inside your head, and it is very subtle. It's very cunning. It's very Genesis 3. Did God really say, right? The first lie that was told to humanity, did God really say? And so if you don't have a foundational understanding of scripture, if you're not in the scripture daily, if you're not, consuming this type of content, you might think that God is talking to you, and it's not him. It's the father of lies that is trying to steal, kill and destroy you. That was the thing that I talked about years ago, Mike, because I was kind of where you were at. The whole focus was growing the show, whatever I got to do to grow the show. And so I read 54 books in 1 year, 4 interviews for this podcast, because I wanted to show the people I was interviewing and show the publicists and show the publishers that I'm the best interviewer. I'm going to read the book and I'm going to ask the best questions. Mike, I didn't read 54 chapters of the Bible that year. I probably didn't read 54 pages of the Bible that year. And it just hit me all at once. I was like, wait a minute. This is a tremendously bad thing right now. I'm shooting at all the wrong targets. And so that's why we started the forging table. That's why I started studying the Bible in groups with men and started doing more stuff on my own, kind of dialing back some of the interviews and doing some other things. And so there are practical things that men can do to lead them in the direction that you're talking about right now. Mike, you talked about a little bit earlier as well. There's obviously been a reputational hit to you personally, whether you care about that or not. It seems like you really don't. The reputational hit for your organization, for Fieldcraft, again, there's still some things that got to be figured out organizationally for how that's going to look moving forward. But for guys that are fans of yours, or guys that are just want to be brothers in arms with you, and I mean that in the Christian sense, how can people support you and your family and all the things that you're doing right now?
Yeah, the best way people can support me is by supporting the hardworking employees that I have at Fieldcraft Survival, by supporting the company and supporting your families and yours level of preparedness. I mean, We educate all over the country every single weekend. We just had a first aid medical seminar or medical conference here in Heber City and didn't have a lot of signups. We have lots of equipment, lots of training, lots of online content, Fieldcraft Survival's app, my personal Patreon, where all the revenue goes to the company. I'm really fearful that I'm going to be out of business. And I know a lot of CEOs, a lot of owners would step up and blow smoke, to somehow mask what's really happening behind the scenes. It is nearly impossible to recover from a 40-50% loss of revenue overnight. That happened overnight. The graph dropped out overnight based on a leaked affidavit, unredacted, by the way. And that takes a hit. I'm not at all worried about my reputation. I don't care. If my kids look up to me as their father, if hopefully one day my spouse and I can work it out, if my mom and stepdad look at me and they think I'm a good son, that's the greatest gift that I could have in my personal reputation. I will just keep doing me. But yeah, I think, gosh, man, telling employees that have worked so hard for you over a real tragic circumstance, that they won't have a job. It's like, yeah, but people can get jobs. It's like, no, these people didn't just leave their jobs to get jobs. They left their jobs to get purpose.
Right.
And they have dumped and poured all of their lives into that purpose of giving back and educating people from all levels of preparedness. Look, Fieldcraft will never go away. We have to restructure. We have to reorganize, but we will always educate people in some form or fashion. I'm thankful for the support that we're getting. I'm thankful that people are rallying behind us, and supporting the company. And that's the best way you could support me.
I appreciate you talking that way, and I got, obviously, guys, follow Fieldcraft everywhere on the different socials. Sign up for the mailing list so that you can be sure about those things. But Mike, even as you describe it, and dude, you're talking to a major league pessimist right here. Okay, so this guy is always falling. The glass is always half empty. The glass was never going to be full. Like, that's the type of guy that I am. Even in hearing you, there's no doubt in my mind that what Fieldcraft and what your future in business and in your family needs to be or wants to be, because of where you're focused at now. And if you can keep that heading, I have full confidence and faith that things are going to work out. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone gets to keep their job. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you were going to take over the world, which was a trajectory that you were on there for a little bit. But I think it's going in a more God honoring direction. And, God's not a genie. He's not just going to give you all these things and Ferraris and influence because, you're focused on him now. That's not how anything works. Obviously, if you read the scriptures, specifically the New Testament, you don't get a guarantee of any of that. All that prosperity garbage is garbage for a reason. That's not how any of this works. We are guaranteed rough times here on this planet, but we're guaranteed the best times possible after we leave this planet. But is there anything else you want to give to our audience before we let you get out of here?
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of complexities to life. I mean, life is very confusing. When I dabble in just reading the news like I used to every day to do this weekly show called Prepared, I see the dysfunction. I could more see it clearer than I've ever seen it based on my detachment from that dysfunction, but also restoring my faith in God. And so I almost feel like it's like being sober at a nightclub and everybody's wasted in the dark and everything's mystical and romantic and sexy. And then you're the only guy who's sober and they turn the lights on and you realize what you're standing in is sticky alcohol and belligerent drunk people. And you realize you don't belong. There are a lot of things that I did to try to belong, and I no longer feel the desire nor need to prove myself, defend my reputation, or belong. As a follower of Christ, my entire existence, to be cognizant enough to understand Jesus Christ and God, that's all you need. You just need to be the sober one. I haven't drunk a sip of alcohol. I've exercised every single day. I focused my efforts and attention to scripture and God. And that doesn't make me a virtuous hero. That personally makes me a better human being. And I don't need YouTube, Twitter, or Instagram to represent that. And so if you're somebody who doesn't have a following, doesn't have a popularity, and you're just getting it done, congratulations, continue to get it done. And if you're not, maybe you need to start, because it will simplify your life. It will improve every optic and focus on everything that God touches. And honestly, man, there's no turning back for me. I've held on to so many things for too long. I've suppressed the right into the wrong, and I'm not willing to make that mistake again. And it doesn't include some virtuous bugle from the hilltop. It's just me getting it done day to day. And will I slip? Yes. But I'll have people like you, close family and friends lifting me up because they know that's the path that I'm on. So yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mike, I'm here for you. You know, you got a 3 a.m. foxhole friend in me. And I'm even just very encouraged by the things that we've been able to accomplish in the last couple of weeks as you work your way and traverse through the situation. So I'm thankful for the time that you've spent with me today, talking openly and honestly about all this, and also all the wisdom that you've shared with the audience. We'll certainly chat more soon as we continue to work through this. All right, brother?
I appreciate you. I appreciate your message. I appreciate your audience. And thanks for having me on, man.
There you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed my time with Mike Glover. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. I've got a link to the Fieldcraft Survival website. Again, guys, go there, support them anywhere on social media. Make sure you're following them and supporting them. If you'd like to check out Mike's book, Prepared, there's a link to that. And I've also got a link to his first appearance on the show. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@undaunted.life. That's info@undaunted.life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.undaunted.life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.